everyone. So today I am joined by Robi, who is the growth lead at Enate. What is Enate, you hear me ask? So Enate is essentially a B2B SaaS tool that lets you view, manage, and track businesses and workflow. Essentially, they work with big enterprises all across the world. And today, we're going to find out all about what Robi does with Enate. So welcome to Zero Calorie Marketing, Robi.
Thank you, sir. It's nice to be here.
Thank you for coming in. And I think we kind of had this conversation nearly half a year ago, when we met and we discovered your love of podcasts.
Indeed. It's been a long time coming, this one.
It is, and we have some cracking podcast recommendations that Robi is going to give you, which is going to be later on in the script. So we're looking forward to discovering that in more detail. So Robi, what exactly is a growth lead?
Well, there's probably many answers to this. Growth and marketing are words that get bandied around quite a lot, or indeed growth marketing. I guess in the most general sense, a growth lead is somebody who can go into a company and have an impact on revenue wherever that is in the funnel. So that might be optimizing top of funnel leads, that might be working on kind of middle of the funnel conversions, or that might even be working with customer service or CX teams to deliver revenue on that side of things. So that's kind of what, in my mind, a growth lead does. My role is, although it's a growth lead job, it's very much kind of, I sit within a marketing team, so my role is, although I have growth lead on my CV, it's typically more of a kind of traditional marketing role. I work in kind of the top to the middle of the funnel area, working both on kind of demand generation and also brand campaigns. So that's kind of my day-to-day.
So essentially it's like the role of a traditional marketer, but mixed in with a bit of like, this kind of new role which is coming around in like CRO, revenue officer, where you're close to the commercials and at the same time you've got half a foot on marketing. Would that be fair? Or? I
would say so, yeah. I would say broadly a growth lead has a little bit more license to roam around the business and see what they can impact, whereas a marketing person takes a more sort of traditional marketing approach and does more top of the funnel. That's not to say that a marketing person shouldn't get involved in things like price and products and all of that good stuff, the full piece that marketing people talk about so regularly. But yeah, that's sort of roughly how I would define it. Many people would have many other different definitions though, so don't take that as read entirely, but that's just my 2 cents.
In terms of, I want to get straight into it, in terms of you've had a few roles within your career, and you've worked for many different companies and organizations of different shapes and sizes. What are the typical challenges that marketing managers face, or growth leads face, essentially?
Sure. I think the first one particularly is focus. One of the things in startups that is true of all startups is that we have limited resources and limited time, always. That's true of large companies as well, but it's particularly true of startups. And the thing that kills time and resources and money is a lack of focus. So being really clear around what you're trying to achieve in what time frame and making that measurable is super important. I would say as a rule of thumb, it's best to do 2 or 3 things really well to a kind of 9 out of 10 standard than it is to do 10 things to a kind of 3 out of 10 standard, for example. So if you can get really clear in your mind about what you're trying to achieve and how you're trying to achieve it, you can funnel resources into the right areas. I would also say this is a really sort of traditional marketing problem, but differentiation is key. And what I mean by that is, differentiation has always been a challenge for marketers, but particularly these days. I read a stat recently that every individual sees 10,000 marketing messages a day, which is insane, right? If you think about that as a figure, it's an insane number. So the ability to cut through that, and that doesn't mean cutting through on the level that massive companies with big budgets cut through, like Coca-Cola or Apple, for example, but it does mean cutting through to your particular audience with your particular message in a way that is compelling. So that's probably challenge number 2. And attribution, if I can say that correctly, is always a challenge for marketers, but particularly I think in B2B. In B2C, it can be easier to attribute sales to a particular channel, particularly within paid, for example. Whereas within B2B, the sale tends to be much more complex. It tends to be a much longer process, and you're also, it's a sale that isn't entirely owned by marketing people. It's owned by salespeople and pre-sales people as well. So attributing where that sale has come from and what's impacting that sale is a much tougher nut to crack within the B2B marketing space than it is within B2C. So those are three areas that I find challenging, I guess.
I mean, I think you can probably make a whole podcast about attribution.
Sure.
Essentially, like from my kind of own anecdotal evidence and also having spoken to a few marketing managers, do you kind of, even though you're seeing conversions coming from different kind of channels, would you have a kind of a gut feeling towards what's actually driving, moving the needle, from when you're seeing leads or sales coming through from the inside?
Yeah, 100%. I think data is important, and that's always going to be the case. But I don't think you can ignore the more sort of qualitative gut feel stuff, and particularly within a complex sale within B2B, you can get. And talking to salespeople is great for this, right? You can get a gut feel of a salesperson really quickly about what's working and what's resonating within the market. Particularly in a circumstance when you're slightly unsure and the data isn't that clear, or maybe you're even struggling to get hold of reliable data, gut feel is normally a reasonably good place to start. In my mind, I think you can overcomplicate attribution quite a lot in some senses. Normally, if it feels right, it's probably not the worst thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my own kind of experience as a small business, we know that if we do activity X, then leads come in, and if we, emphasize cold approaches or put out more content on social media, then there is actual direct traction. So, I agree with you. The other question, and this may be a question that a lot of marketing managers as well as growth managers or growth leads kind of face. You have very big companies that you're competing against at Enate. How do you differentiate your offering to what your competitors are offering?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, and probably one that most people who work in a kind of a small B2B SaaS environment like I do, if you're in a startup, you're likely to be going up against much bigger, more established competitors. That is that can be a strength in some ways, in the sense that how we think about it is. And our competitors as a large businesses, like, let me give you some examples, like, so ServiceNow, Pega, Appian are huge businesses, and we're relatively small. However, everyone in our market and everyone in our space and everyone who could potentially be a buyer of our product has heard of those businesses before. And so their frame of reference is ServiceNow, Pega, Appian. Traditional BPMs is what we call them. We can use the fact that people will understand a bit about those businesses to differentiate ourselves against them. So we can almost say, well, you know who ServiceNow are, but our proposition is that we're faster, we're cheaper, we're more flexible than what you already know. And you can play off that and differentiate yourselves by contrasting to what they already know about a particular business, and placing yourself favourably against that is how I would really think about it.
So it's almost like the previous guests we had, their competitors were HubSpot and Salesforce. So it would be like, we're like HubSpot and Salesforce, but for small, medium-sized enterprises, or that kind of thing.
Precisely that line, yeah.
So, Robi, what does content marketing mean to you?
It's an interesting question. I would probably describe myself as more of a generalist marketer these days, but I started my career off within content marketing, so that is very much my roots. I think, again, you can complicate this, and there's lots of answers to it, but I think at its very heart, content marketing and marketing in general needs to make people feel something. There's no point in doing content unless, or at least there's no point in doing content for a business unless you're driving action off the back of it, right? So whether your medium is video in your case, whether it's written content, whether it's social media content, that's a lovely plug there. Whatever type of content it is, your content has to be compelling enough, and it has to make people feel or do something in order to benefit the organization. So that's a really, really broad term, but I honestly am a big believer in simplicity, and I don't think the term content marketing has to be any more complicated than that.
Okay, cool. I mean, this essentially, when we work with marketing managers and marketing teams at companies, usually the brief, sometimes it's a complicated brief, but we just have to break it down and say, okay, make this product appeal to X, Y, Z customers and address their problems directly. We have X, we have this, here's how we can do this for you. So yeah, agree with you. Another question is like brand voice. You've, in terms of, you have a few separate channels. I know that when we first met, we discussed landing pages as well as email campaigns that you have, and as well as social channels that you're currently involved in. How do you maintain your brand voice across all these different channels?
I think that's an interesting one. I would actually take a step back and sort of talk a bit more about brand in general. I think the first thing to do is understand what you're trying to communicate from a brand perspective. So if brand to you means, and there's different levels of this, right? If brand to you just means putting out consistent collateral across multiple channels that is in a consistent messaging, then fine. Maybe brand means to you that, but also it means communicating a wide brand message and a brand narrative around a particular area, perhaps to generate community around a product. Or if you want to go really far on the other end and do a whole kind of like massive brand campaign that the likes of sort of Red Bull do, and create a whole movement around that. Red Bull and GoPro are the two kind of go-to examples of that. Then you can do that, but that's like one end of the spectrum. So kind of when you're thinking about brand, I would figure out where you sit and what is appropriate for your business. For Enate, for example, going and flinging a guy out of space. What did that guy who Red Bull do? Jumped out of...
Yeah, he's the highest ever jump from outer space.
Yes. Yeah. God, no. Yeah, him. So we're not going to do that. That's not going to be part of our brand strategy.
Exclusives here.
So yeah. And by the way, it's absolutely fine if your intention to build a brand is just to put out some consistent brand messaging. Sometimes that's good enough for lots of businesses. That's absolutely fine. So figure out what you're aiming towards, and then basically getting clarity on what it is you are communicating. And then from a kind of operational perspective, it's really about I guess getting somebody to own it. I think that the best way of rolling out a brand strategy or a kind of consistent brand is just making it somebody's responsibility to either create all of the assets or check all of the assets before they go out. It's really as simple as that. So yeah, that's a roundabout way of asking your original question. Literally jumping out of space.
Yeah, top tips here. Actually, just one follow-up question. If someone's watching this and they have just joined a startup maybe, or a small company which doesn't really have a brand guideline, or things that are kind of not exactly within the marketing framework, what advice would you give them? So let's say the founder of the company said, we want to put this across YouTube, Instagram, email campaign, landing pages. How would you kind of be, I guess, figuring out the brand voice as you go along, with the brand guidelines? What advice would you give them? I'm sure you've been in these situations before.
Yeah, I think in that particularly early stage, when you actually have nothing on paper, then that's a really nice place to be in some senses, because there are no constraints really. As soon as you start putting stuff down in a brand guidelines thing, there are constraints, and that creates constraints for you. Not all of those constraints are needed. But when you've got nothing, you are in a position where you can test and try things and just throw stuff at the wall and see what works. In a small startup, that startup putting out various different pieces of sort of brand collateral, the reality is that if you're small and have a small audience, not that many people are going to notice. Yeah. And if it goes wrong, it's not going to be a disaster. Like it's not going to be, if a huge business, I keep referring to Coca-Cola, but if Coca-Cola, if one of their social media interns puts the wrong thing out on social media or wrong Instagram post, that's a $1 million mistake. Yeah. Whereas for a small startup, you can try things and make mistakes and do things wrong. So I would embrace that at the start and basically see what works.
So essentially, if you're working for a tiny company or a startup, you're starting with a blank canvas and you've got nothing to lose, essentially. So
pretty much.
Those are the two huge positives for anyone who's in this situation. Thank you for that. What parts of the marketing funnel are keeping you awake at night?
Oh, this is a great question. I do sleep relatively well these days, so I'm not actually
swimming.
I do lots of exercise. So first of all, sort out your sleep. And don't worry too much about marketing, because it's important, but it's not that important. It's not worth ruining your sleep over. I guess I always find the middle of the funnel a challenge, and particularly that area, that sort of grey area, where it's often a grey area in some companies, where the handover to sales happens. Marketers feel like they have control at the top of the funnel, where we can do things that we like to do, like generate leads and build landing pages and do events and get people interested and engaged at the top. And then inevitably within a B2B context, there is a process by which sales becomes increasingly involved with leads, and then marketing people have to increasingly take their hands off and let salespeople do their thing, which they're great at, by the way. Nothing wrong with salespeople. But I think from a marketing point of view, it's understanding, because by the way, once the lead has gone to sales, that doesn't mean you're rid of it, right? You can still impact things, you can still enable sales, you can still do things that are going to help that deal. It's I guess just like understanding how you can impact and what's the best way of you being involved in that, and just figuring that out. It's often really a relationships thing with the rest of the commercial organisation that you're working for, and how that relationship works. But yeah, I find that I've always found that a challenge, managing that kind of middle of the funnel stage where you're not just doing pure play marketing. Yeah,
no, I completely get you. Often we get involved in. I think it's a lot of our SaaS B2B customers especially are really they're obsessed with top of funnel content, and a lot of the times, the first thing we ask our clients are things like, where in the funnel are your problems? And usually it's, if you're a niche player and you're serving a very, very specific market, usually the top of funnel content, people have heard of you if you do few exhibitions, or if you sponsor things, or if you go out and if you've got a sales force. But they completely ignore the middle or even the bottom of the funnel content, and we kind of have to advise our SaaS companies are things like, look, how about if you were to do a customer testimonial versus a flashy advert, and most of the time we end up having to appease a few different departments. So yeah, completely.
Yeah, for sure. And often marketing people, like I've got increasingly more interested in the middle and the bottom of the funnel, and I found that really rewarding, because you're closer to the money, right? You're closer to the sale, you're closer to the thing that company is actually in existence for. Yeah. And that's much more rewarding in my mind than just doing a top of funnel piece that's an awareness thing. Not that doesn't have value, but it's obviously about the end game, right? And being more involved in that, I found has been really valuable and has made me a better marketer.
Oh, and I guess also, as if you're closer to the actual sale, you'll be able to have when you do your annual or quarterly report, you could say, here's what we've spent and here's our kind of sales.
Which helps with the attribution side of things, doesn't it?
Otherwise known as how to look good in front of your boss. AI did this. So going away from this, I think when I think the second or third time we met, we discussed books, podcasts, and that kind of thing. So this part of the podcast, we want to kind of get to know you better. What are 3 must-read books for you that you would recommend any marketer read? Doesn't have to be fiction, could be non-fiction, anything.
Cool. So I'm going to do 2 like business-related ones, and then 1 just like entirely non-business related. So the most useful kind of business book I've read, it's not even anything to do with marketing. Well, it has something to do with marketing, but it's not entirely a marketing book in itself. Is the Sales Acceleration Formula by Mark Roberge. Mark Roberge is the former. He's one of the earliest employees at HubSpot, so responsible for growing HubSpot from nothing to the massive behemoth that it is today. And it's really about how to build a repeatable sales function, and also how marketing feeds into that. So one of the things I knew very little about when I came into marketing, and even after the first few years of being in my marketing career, was sales and what the hell sales does and what happens behind the door. So yeah, books like the Sales Acceleration Formula has been fantastic to understand the sales process and how, as a marketing person, you ultimately feed into that. So that was really valuable. I think from a more kind of startups perspective, I love the book Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. It's a really interesting view of how startups work, particularly from a kind of tech perspective. So I'm somebody who Geoffrey Moore would describe as a laggard. I'm not very techie.
Oh, I'm surprised.
I'm just very good at acting. That's what it is. And so yeah, I mean, the book is all about how marketing, or startups are often marketed to innovators in the first instance, and then once they've kind of captured the innovators in their space, they then have to move on to kind of slower tech adopters, and how your marketing tactics have to change with the change of audience. So that was a really eye-opening one. The one I'm going to mention purely for my own self-indulgent reasons is because I'm a massive history buff. I did history at university, and
he doesn't go. If you ever meet Robi, give him about 5 minutes before he mentions that.
I mean, we've done about how long? 20 minutes, and I haven't mentioned history. So I mean, I've been itching to talk about this. I've been very restrained so far. So yeah, some of you may have heard, dear listeners, the Napoleon biopic, the Ridley Scott movie that's coming out in a few weeks' time. I think actually next week. Oh. So in preparation for that, I can't sit through a historical movie without going, oh, is that true? Oh, is that true? Oh, I don't know. Did that really happen? So in preparation for the movie, I've read a big sort of, you would call it a doorstop book, 800-page biography of Napoleon, to understand, the true historical character behind the movie. And it's I couldn't recommend it enough. It's been fantastic. So anyone who's interested in history, anyone who's interested in cinema, anyone who's interested in the world should read this book. So that's my pitch.
Thank you, Robbie. On that note, this show has kindly been sponsored by Ridley Scott's movie Napoleon.
That too. Yeah.
Go and watch it.
That's my freelance job on the side.
Actually, I've got to say, when I first heard about Crossing the Chasm, it really blew my mind in terms of, I could see myself between an early adopter and sometimes a laggard, depending on how exciting or how innovative or, how kind of intimidating the technology is. For example, I was an early adopter of Instagram because it was part of Facebook, whereas with TikTok, I feel like I'm a laggard.
Yeah.
It's and even within this kind of small scale things, you kind of see yourself in one of these, or I guess the chasm. So that it was, when I first discovered it, it kind of made sense. And how we operate our business is essentially we go after the early adopters for certain things we're trying to do. So, go and read this book. There's probably, if you don't want to read the book, there's probably a YouTube video somewhere, which is how I discovered this. So
it's such a simple idea as well. And often the best ideas and the clearest ideas are the most simple, right? And he's managed to write a best-selling book about something that should be obvious, and it is probably partly already within our minds, but he's just able to kind of communicate it really clearly and well. So good luck to him.
Yeah, it just makes. So I think the first thing I thought about was how my parents use technology. You always have that one friend who was the last one to have a smartphone or WhatsApp in their phone. And usually they kind of fit into different parts of the chasm, I guess. So moving on. You love podcasts. I know that because
I do.
You recommend me.
I do. I'm now on a podcast, which is...
and now it's meta.
I know.
The medium that you love, you are actually in and changing things for the better. So what are 3 must-listen-to podcasts? It doesn't have to be marketing, could be non-marketing.
I actually don't listen to any marketing podcasts because I basically spend too much time listening to podcasts that on areas of my life that I consider my hobbies. So I'm really into history, as I mentioned. I'm into sport. So I listen to a podcast called The Rest is History, which is a podcast by Dominic Sambrook and Tom Holland. It's I would say, smash hit podcast. I recently watched them live. They sold out the Hammersmith Apollo. So it's a big deal. They're making a subject that is often seen as quite nerdy, and I've always seen history as quite nerdy throughout my time reading about it. Make it sound rock star. So to have this live show was very exciting for me. I've been obsessed with cricket over the summer. I listened to a podcast called The Grey Cricketer, which basically did nothing to assuage my nerves and general pain and anxiety from watching the Ashes. which was a horrible experience, but it had to be done. And the other one I will mention is I'm a massive Alan Partridge fan. I've been a Partridge fan for years. When it was a TV show, when it was a movie, when it was they've gone through all of the mediums it's possible to do. The Alan Partridge podcast from the Oast House is also fantastic. Although, basically, I sit on the tube giggling at it, which makes me look quite weird if I'm sort of sitting in a tube carriage with the furious commuters in London, just sort of giggling away. So, that's a word of warning.
Robbie, I actually do that as well. I commute into work, and there's a few podcasts that I listen to, comedy podcasts, and sometimes I'm trying to hold my laughing because it's not appropriate to laugh, burst out into laughter, especially no one knows what you're listening to. There's some podcasts that I can listen to. You said you don't listen to marketing podcasts. What about Zero Calorie Marketing? Surely you've got to put that in your favourites from now.
Well, I do. Well, now that I'm on it, I'll listen to my own episode. I'm sure you've had fantastic guests that I will now listen to, of course. Add that to the list.
Yeah, and if you are watching this and you want to get into podcasts or listen to podcasts, Zero Calorie Marketing is where it's at. Robbie, as someone who works in tech, and you've probably cycled through a whole lot of SaaS tools that makes your life easier. What are 3 SaaS tools that you cannot live without?
So the first one that came to mind, and lots of people will use this, is Notion. I'm a words person, as you can probably tell from my diatribe that I've come up with on this show, and I love Notion. It's just great for like putting ideas down and organize. It feels like it's sort of a tech tool that is the inside of my brain. So that really revolutionized my life when I came across it. Similarly, Miro. I love Miro as just basically a digital whiteboard.
How do you spell that?
Miro. And it's basically a way of, it's a digital whiteboard, so you can kind of use it to brainstorm ideas, and everyone can be on it and do that kind of thing. So if you are doing brainstorms, lots of kind of product teams use it as well. So if you are doing brainstorms and want to kind of get your ideas on a big piece of paper, then do that. Anyone who works with me knows that I love the Miro, so they'll be sick of me hearing that, sick of me saying that. And I work a lot with HubSpot. I think some people have a downer on HubSpot, but I think it's a very good CRM, and I work a lot with it. I am a kind of, I started off in content, so I've been, early in my career, I kind of shied away from sort of CRM systems because I thought it was all numbers and data, and I didn't want anything to do with that. But recently, my job has become more around kind of CRM systems, and I find HubSpot really good. So there's a reason why they've got loads of money, and they're making a ton of cash, and Mark Roberge has done a good job. Yeah, there we go.
This is, at this point, regular listeners of this podcast will know. If anyone from Notion, Miro, or HubSpot is actually listening, and you want to give away some of that cash that you're making and sponsor a podcast, a homegrown podcast like this, then we're looking for sponsors. So get in touch.
Definitely do that.
That was such a smooth segue.
It was brilliant.
Proud of that. You mentioned a couple of people earlier in terms of books that you read. Are there any people or companies that you follow in, it could be B2B or B2C, kind of companies that can inspire you to kind of take inspiration that you can apply to your work?
I think have you come across a company called Basecamp?
Yes.
They're kind of a competitor of Monday.com. I think they are fantastic from a landing page point of view. I think their landing pages are really innovative and communicate what I've always wanted to communicate on a landing page, but just better. So I think they're fantastic. I think there's a ton of good business people and marketing people out on LinkedIn. I would say that, and you can probably see this by my choice of kind of other podcasts and other books to listen to. A lot of my great ideas and a lot of the things that inspire me come from outside the marketing world. I think we can get very kind of sucked into doing what the marketing playbook or what the traditional kind of business playbook should suggest. So I love reading about history, and I love sport, and I tend to get inspired by those things. So I wouldn't necessarily put like a specific LinkedIn influencer that you should follow. I would say basically get out of the marketing world and really understand like who your hobbies are and just like pursue your hobbies and use that to kind of feed your working life, because it certainly gives me a ton of good ideas reading about Julius Caesar and Napoleon, and I come into work and conquer the world. No, that's not true.
Take over the world. No, I agree. Some of them, like there was a point where I was just churning through loads and loads of business, marketing, sales books, and I think it came to a point where all the ideas, all the books were kind of almost repeating themselves, and same analogies that you could see from one kind of marketing would kind of be applied, it would pop up somewhere else. And I think I was reading Jeff Bezos's A to Z Store book, which is really worth reading, by the way. And I think he said something along the lines of the best ideas came to him when he was reading fiction and novels or drama or whatever it may be. And after, I think I went through a phase where I was reading almost like a book a week. It got to around 150, which sounds a lot, but at that time, I was kind of churning through books, didn't really have much of a life.
That was the old you.
That's the old me. Nothing much has changed since then, but I just don't read as much. After a while, I thought, okay, so these kind of ideas are kind of almost going in a circular basis. So I started reading lots and lots of like great fiction books. I think I went through BBC's. I didn't go through the whole thing. The BBC's top 100 books, classics, and I think the ideas came so much more crystallized because you can make analogies from what this character is thinking versus, you can look at the scientific paper and say if you do X, if you change your landing page to purple, then whereas it's more like drama and kind of fiction books really gives you an idea of how people are motivated in ways that you wouldn't really consider. So I completely agree with and also history. If you don't learn from your mistakes, then you're bound to repeat it over and over again.
100%.
And I think I was actually going to ask you this earlier. There was a TikTok thing, trending thing that was going around, which said you go to someone and say, when was the last time you thought about the Roman Empire? I don't know if you know.
Oh yeah. I've got some stick for this because I do think about the Roman Empire quite a lot, and there are several women in my life who went, "Is this really true?" And I went, "Yeah."
In your case, it is actually absolutely true.
It's legitimately true. Yeah. I don't know. Lots of sort of millennial men are fairly sad and sort of wistfully think about the Roman Empire, I guess. But there was, I think it was a funny kind of cultural moment and a kind of viral moment because there was an element of truth in it, and I was certainly one of those people who it resonated with.
No, completely. I mean, we're in Tower Bridge, and there is the Roman walls. I think about it every day when I walk
exactly.
past. So,
see.
And sometimes I throw a coin at it, just to kind of
to placate the gods of our ancestors.
Exactly. Last thing, what advice would you give to marketing managers or anyone who's watching, who's in a marketing professional?
I would say two really simple pieces of advice. Don't try and do too much. I think there's so many options that you can do within the marketing space. You can come into work and say, I can do these 10 different things. I can execute on 10 different channels. We can do 10 different events or whatever. Realistically, the more you do, the less well you'll do those things in terms of quality of execution. So I would say basically find out what works for you. Find out those 2-3 things that work for you. I kind of alluded to this earlier. And basically just do it really well. And don't try and fall into the trap of shiny object syndrome of running after, you don't have to make a TikTok account, for example. You don't have to make a Discord community or whatever. Just do what works for you. And then I would just say, probably related to that, carve out time to just think. Thinking is really underrated, particularly in a startup world where results and generating demand in the marketer's point of view, it is paramount. But you don't get there without actually thinking through what you're doing, rather than just going execute. So yeah, you can actually save yourself a lot of time in the long run by just like taking a step back, thinking about stuff. And yeah, as Jeff Bezos said, your best ideas tend to come from you not trying to think deliberately and solving a problem. It just sort of comes to you. So yeah, those two things. Don't try and do too much, and make sure you have time to think.
Cool. My mum, one of the advices that she gave me was, I love these maxims, Robbie. Don't do one thing at a time, and if you can't finish something, then don't start. You know, so it was more like at that time I was really stressed out, and she's like, just if you're going to start something, finish it. Or if you're not going to finish it, just don't do it, and then just do one thing at a time. And I was doing my masters at that time, and it really helped me. Final words: how can people get hold of you if they want to, catch up, maybe ask you about the Roman times, or get more podcast recommendations?
Well, I mean, I'm always happy to chat about the Roman times or whatever times you want to talk about in history. So if you're up for that, give me a shout. I'm a slave to LinkedIn, so like a lot of people are. So just give me a shout on LinkedIn, Robbie O'Cleary, and yeah, you can contact me there.
Well, Robbie, thank you so much for being on the show. We had a lot of fun.
We did.
Meeting with you and also learning about what you do. We will hopefully have you on in the future and learn more about what you're up to. And hopefully when you find and discover more interesting podcasts, you will send them to me. Thank you again, Robbie, and I don't know. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sats. Thank you for having me on.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.